running, so now I can share my screen. Where There we go. Oh, no, I can't share my screen because I don't have it properly resized for sharing. Gotta make everything just right. Okay, there we go. Now we can get the actual sharing going on. Sorry for the delay. Sharing has kicked in. Hopefully everyone can see what's on my screen. I think I've got YouTube properly organized. Yes, okay. All right, just a couple more little technical things than usual, but it looks like it's all working fine now. So, good morning to everyone, and for anyone who hasn't seen me since last Sunday, Chodesh Tov, we are now in the month of Nisan, and that means we are hurtling towards redemption at the celebration of Pesach. But even as much as Pesach occupies our study, as well as our home preparations and service preparations, we still have Torah readings to study and to learn as well. The Parshiot cannot be neglected, even with a holiday like Pesach looming around the corner. So let's take a snippet from the Parasha of Vayikra here at the beginning of the book of Vayikra, right now where we are beginning this new book in the Torah, and see what we can learn from a small slice. We are going to begin in chapter 5 and start off with verse number 1. Excuse me. Excuse me. Okay. Now a person, when he sins, should he hear the public voice carrying a threat, and though he was a witness either seeing or knowing, he does not tell, he is to bear his iniquity. All right, so as is common, Everett Fox renders the Hebrew in a way that sounds a little confusing, because the Hebrew is slightly confusing. I will explain this according to the standard tradition, which I think is pretty well justified by the words, even if the syntax is perhaps not quite what we would be expecting. So we are talking about a particular type of sin here. And what is that sin? That sin is that there has been an imprecation, there has been a call for testimony, and a person has been asked to give that testimony, and they refuse to give that testimony, even though they have something to tell. To do so is a transgression. To do so is a chet. It is an avon, as we say later on in the verse. This is a transgression. Now, we're going to talk about this in much more detail, but we want to put it into context. So rather than just dealing with verse number 1, we're going to continue for a few more to see what the overall structure is. This is one of a few that are happening in this context. So we continue now with verse number 2. Or a person that touches anything tameh, meaning ritually impure, either the carcass of a tameh wild animal, or the carcass of a tameh domestic animal, or the carcass of a tameh swarming creature, or, and though the fact is hidden from him, he has become tameh, and so has incurred guilt. So this is hinting at something that the rest of Vayikra covers in much more detail, and we've talked about before. But there are certain cases where we will commit a transgression accidentally. The whoops moments of life. There are many different varieties of how that can occur, but just because it's an accident doesn't mean that there isn't some need for redress. In this case, we'll see the bringing of a sacrifice. And that's an important aspect in Judaism, is that we are not completely off the hook just because we made a mistake. It just means the remedy for our mistake is very different than the remedy if we did something deliberately. So here we are talking about something that happened accidentally, and maybe the person didn't even realize that. I should also point out that becoming ritually impure in general is not a transgression. There are certain circumstances in which it does become problematic. For example, if you became ritually impure and then went to the altar, well, that would be a problem. Obviously, the Kohanim have additional restrictions on this as well. But this is just one of the list. Verse 3 gives us another one. Or when he touches human tum'ah, human forms of ritual impurity, including any tum'ah whereby one can become tameh, and though the fact is hidden from him, he later comes to know that he incurred guilt. Or, in verse 4, a person, when he swears rashly with his lips to do ill or to do good, including whatever a human might say rashly in swearing, and though the fact is hidden from him, he comes to know that he incurred guilt in any one of these matters. So our final case here is the case of somebody who is making an oath. They are swearing an oath, but they are doing so, well, poorly. They are speaking fast. They are speaking maybe out of passion, maybe out of anger, maybe out of even celebration, because this can be for good or for bad. It does not have to be only a negative oath of some variety, but this can be even for good. Nonetheless, since the person has done an oath, it means they have invoked God's name. And because they have invoked God's name rashly or inappropriately, then that is a transgression. Now, you might be saying, but wait a minute, wouldn't a person know they were about to say God's name inappropriately? And the short of it is that while that's very often the case and something that all of us should be on the lookout for, not that we should be taking this type of oath in any event, but there is also the circumstance where a person might have thought their oath was appropriate and worthy of being uttered with God's name, but it later comes to their realization that their oath was complete nonsense, at which point they recognize that they had taken God's name in vain in that type of oath. All right. In all of these cases, it shall be when he realizes guilt in any one of these and confesses how he has sinned thereby, as always the vidui, the confessional, is very important, that he is to bring his asham, that is to say, a guilt offering to Adonai for the sin whereby he has sinned, meaning for any of the sins that were just listed. A female from the flock, a she-lamb or a hairy she-goat as a chatat offering, and the priest is to effect purgation, that is to say, to effect atonement for him from his sin. Now, if his hand cannot reach enough, meaning he doesn't have enough wealth for a sheep, he is to bring his asham offering for, as his asham offering for what he sinned, 2 turtle doves and 2 young pigeons, to Adonai, one for the chatat offering and one for an offering up, just a general olah. He is to bring them to the priest, and he is to bring near the one of the chatat offering first, and pinch off its head opposite the back of its neck. He is not to divide it, etc., etc. And then we go into the details of how the Kohen will handle that sacrifice. Now, since no one here is a Kohen, presumably officiating in the temple itself, I think we can go ahead and pause there because I want to have a little bit more time to discuss the bookends of our section, which, as you can see, we're dealing with the hastily uttered oath, and even more powerfully, whoops, went past it, the beginning of chapter 5, where a person fails to give evidence or testimony that they could have given. Both of these are sins that are equivalent to other violations of ritual purification and many other things listed throughout the book of Leviticus. And yet many people feel that both the uttering of an oath incorrectly of, I swear I'm going to, or just not giving testimony are not really such a big deal. And yet the Torah seems to be putting it on a very high level indeed. And as we're going to see in our commentary, there are good reasons for that. So let's go ahead and dive into that commentary and see what's going on under the hood. All right, so we're going to begin with Mishnah Torah. This is Rambam's great work of Jewish law compilation, where he took the teachings that were not only found from stretching from the Torah through the Mishnah into the Talmud, but also of the people who had been continuing to teach and interpret since the Talmud's publication up until his own day. And it is still one of the most concise and clear summaries of a well-liked opinion. No Jewish legal compilation is universally agreed with on all points, but this one certainly gets a great deal of respect. So here in his section on oaths, although a person who took a false oath or an oath in vain is given lashes, so pause there, the standard punishment for somebody who took a false oath or an oath in vain when it was recognized that they had done so would be for there to be makot, for them to be flogged. And similarly, one who takes a false shvuat ha'edut or shvuat ha'pikadon brings a sacrifice. So this is the section that we're dealing with here. The shvuat ha'edut, the oath of testimony, is where you would swear, I swear I have nothing to say about this topic. And if you had done that falsely, when you actually did have knowledge of the topic, then you are going to bring a sacrifice. Now, in both of those cases, the false oaths or the other types of oaths that were just mentioned, they do not receive complete atonement for the sin of taking that false oath. As Exodus 20, verse 7 states, God will not cleanse one who takes his name in vain. All right, so don't worry, we are going to find atonement eventually, but at the moment we are trying to emphasize that taking an oath or giving a false oath, more importantly, is something that cannot simply be fixed either by flogging when that was appropriate or by the bringing of a sacrifice when that was appropriate. Instead, there is an additional layer that is required, and that is mentioned in the second half here. He will not be absolved from the judgment of heaven until he receives retribution for his desecration of his great name. As Leviticus 19 states, you shall not take a false oath in my name, for you will desecrate the name of your God. This is what we call a chilul Hashem, a desecration of God's name. Therefore, a person must be very careful with regard to this sin more than with regard all other sins. So what Rambam is trying to say here, based upon the teachings of the Talmud and everything else that preceded him, it's not his own ideas by any stretch, is that when you swear either incorrectly or you swear that you have no information, when in fact you do, which is the topic of chapter 5 that we began with, not only will you be punished in the normal way, whether that be flogging or whether requiring a sacrifice, but there will be some other retribution at the hand of heaven for what you did. That you cannot simply say, oops, and make amends. There is going to be retribution for what you did. Now, that is different than most other categories of transgressions found in Torah. Usually, there is a simple procedure for making atonement, and once that's been done, the slate has been wiped clean, and you are good to go again. But here, because of the nature of this particular category of sins, of these violation of oaths or oaths about testimony, you have actually opened up such a problem that there is going to be retribution even if you have already made regular atonement. Suffice it to say that there will be even worse retribution if a person hasn't made atonement, but that the retribution is coming one way or another. It's only up to us to decide the manner or the degree based upon our willingness to admit our mistake. Now, that is a huge, huge burden to place upon people, that if you make these oaths incorrectly, that there will be retribution, even if you try to fix what you have done by making atonement for it in all of the normal manner. There is definitely going to be a retribution. That is very, very unusual and very, very sharp. Now, we have to ask, is that fair? I mean, after all, why would this sort of sin be something that is going to carry with it punishment regardless of our attempt at atonement when other forms of sins do not? If I accidentally eat something that isn't kosher, there's normal atonement for that, and there's no retribution that comes once that atonement's been made. So what's going on here? Even something as severe as violating Shabbat or accidentally doing something incorrect in our business law. Yes, it has to be, amends have to be made, but that doesn't mean I'm going to still be punished once I've done that atonement. And yet here it is. Well, one way to understand the fairness of this is to look into a midrash that is found within our tradition, and which I think Shnei Luchot HaBrit, one of the great compilations of Musar, of ethical teachings, puts very succinctly. This verse contains, that is to say, our verse in chapter 5, verse 1, contains an allusion to the oath of loyalty to the Torah each soul is made to swear by the angel who taught it that same Torah while still in the mother's womb. So this is a midrash that comes in the Masechet Nida, as we can see here on 30b, that as the child grows within the mother, that an angel is believed to be giving it the lessons of Torah and is giving it an oath that it will be loyal to the Torah, that it will fulfill Torah, that we are already born having prenatally agreed to that. That is to say, the soul is bound to the Torah, regardless of what our feelings may be about the Torah as we grow or even as we reach adulthood. That before we were born, this is what we had sworn. Now, how do we get that from our verse? Well, the phrasing of keep your promise presupposes that everyone has taken such a vow, that they have already made such a promise, and the only way that could happen to have it for universal would be that this is something that we have been born with. Now, whether or not this is literally true, certainly we know that our soul comes from the realm of God, and thus it would have been exposed to the perfection of God's light and God's truth, and as it enters this world, it would be bringing with it a commitment to that light and that truth, because that is fundamental to its nature. We don't need to reduce this to a fairy tale of the imagery of an angel literally sitting in the womb giving Torah lessons, but the metaphor is a powerful one, and the lesson is even more powerful. That our very existence is contingent upon, it is built upon our understanding of our commitment to Torah itself, even if we sometimes will stray from that, even if sometimes we will become blinded or deluded by the world around us into thinking we need not keep Torah. So when someone asks us to swear that we don't have testimony because they think we do, and we swear that we don't have testimony when we actually do, we are not merely lying at that moment, we are uprooting the entire underpinning of our existence, which is to say Torah itself. Because Torah only works if the people are willing to engage in it. And we are dependent upon each other in that, no more so than when we're talking about our proceedings that are built upon the oaths that we make to one another. This is something that cannot be overstressed, that while keeping Shabbat or keeping kashrut as classic, very important mitzvot are often used, examples of very important mitzvot, those you can technically kind of do on your own. I can keep Shabbat just in the privacy of my house, and I don't need someone else to make that work for me. I can keep kashrut if I'm a vegetarian, unless I'm going to practice shrita and slaughter an animal myself. But when it comes to our court proceedings, which are really an attempt to reconcile the problems we might have in our community, where Reuben says Shmuel loaned him money and Shmuel says he doesn't, and that he can prove it because, Simon over there was there when he refused to loan the money or refused to take on the debt. And then he's asking for you to testify. If we don't actually participate in that, then all of that of society falls apart. That society as society, community as community, down to congregation as congregation, depends upon people being honest and forthright and willing to participate in the needs of sharing that information that allows the community to work. If we refuse, then all of that collapses. The entire system of justice collapses, but so does even our normal civil life collapse if we are refusing to stand up and say what is true or what is not true when we have such information. And of course, maybe it goes without saying, but I'll say it anyway, because a lot of people currently don't seem to remember this. Lying deliberately is also incredibly corrosive to this entire process. That, I think, is generally well understood, but the idea of keeping silent when you should be speaking is something that many people don't recognize is just as damaging to a community or society. All right, let's continue on that topic as we go through the commentary. So here we have a selection taken from Sefer HaChinuch, and Sefer HaChinuch is one of the great compilations of the explanation of the different mitzvot in a sort of cursory way. He doesn't go into as much detail point by point as Rambam does, and tends to focus also a little bit more on the underlying feelings of each of the commandments. And he has this to say. But there is a commandment of testimony, that is, to say the testimony in front of the judges, in all that we know of it, whether with the testimony the accused will become liable for death or money that is earmarked for him, or whether it will be his salvation for his money or his life. Meaning that we are obligated to give testimony regardless of the impact or the outcome our testimony will have. It may set somebody free, it may sentence someone to death, it may give somebody the money that they rightly deserve, it may take away money from someone because they don't rightly deserve it. And we have that obligation because of what Leviticus 5:1 says, and he is a witness or saw or knew. If he does not say, he will carry his iniquity. In every matter, it is an obligation upon us to say the testimony in front of the court. And citations there from Rambam's Mishnah Torah as well as the Talmud in Bava Kama. However, there is a difference between monetary laws and capital and other laws in the Torah, meaning between laws about who owes who what and other types of crimes that might be committed. With monetary laws, a man is not obligated to testify about them on his own unless a party in the case or the court solicits him. So if you know something about somebody's loan or somebody's business agreement or employment agreement, but you have not been called upon to give testimony, you are not obligated to bang down the door to go give that information. Now, should you still try to help if it is a useful part of the proceedings? Of course, but one would not be liable if you did not. However, but with capital laws and other prohibitions in the Torah, a man is obligated to come on his own and say the testimony in front of a court so as to destroy the evil and to separate a man from a prohibition. So we are obligated in all other matters where it's more than just who owes who what money. We are obligated to volunteer our testimony if we have something relevant to say on the matter. And of course, in both of these cases, if a person is summoned to give testimony, they may not refuse, and refusal would be considered a sin. It is from the roots of the commandment that it is because there is great benefit to the people with this commandment. It is not necessary to write at length about it, as things are known to all who see the sun. So Sefer HaChinuch uses a wonderful poetic idiom that I'm not sure still applies. It used to be that everybody sort of understood, not exactly took for granted, but at least were all on the same page, that if people refused to give testimony, that everything would fall apart. I mean, how would I ever be able to rely upon another person? If I give him 500 shekels to buy a piece of land and I come to take the land and he says, I never gave him the money, if I cannot rely on the two people who were with us when I made that purchase to come forward and give testimony, and to give testimony honestly, then how would I ever be able to make a purchase? I need to know that I can summon those two to the court. And that seems so obvious that Sefer HaChinuch, who is usually a little bit more long-winded on these sorts of things, doesn't even feel that he needs to explain the importance of this, that it is just so obvious and fundamental to a community. Now, the difference, of course, between his community and ours is we live in a community of anonymity and of distance. That many people in our modern world do not feel a sense of obligation to each other. They do not feel a sense of connection to each other. It's not my business what's going on. It's not their business what's going on with me. And we'll each live in our own private domain, and the less we interact, the better. While it is certainly right and fair that somebody should have the freedom to live their life as they wish, that does not mean we are disconnected one from another. You may not be able to impose upon me your own belief system or your own ideas of what is or is not a worthwhile form of life, but that doesn't mean I and you don't have reciprocal obligations to each other in order to maintain the community that we live in and in which we have that freedom. And that is something that sadly does not seem to be as universally understood as it once was. Certainly in the past, living in communities where each person was known to each other, you would know that you had to stand up for the other person or against them if necessary, because that was part of what it meant to be a person known as right and honest within that community. All right, we'll continue from there. And from the laws of the commandment is also that which they, may their memory be blessed, said, here in the Talmud, that any man who said at his testimony in front of a court, and they investigated him according to their will, may not go back and contradict anything from all that he said in front of them, and say that he erred or was inadvertent, or that he remembered afterwards that the matter was not like he testified. And even if he gave reason for his words, we do not listen to him. And also testimony in a deed, meaning a document, is like testimony that the court investigated according to their will. And so the witnesses may not recant on anything in the deed. Now, this at first blush may seem a little, well, perplexing. After all, if somebody realizes they made a mistake in their testimony, why wouldn't we want them to come back and give more correct information? Well, first of all, recognize that when it says that he gave the testimony and it was investigated, it means that the court did grill him thoroughly to make sure that his testimony was reliable, accurate, and fit all of the other criteria for being acceptable testimony. Now, why would we, after all of that, not want him to recant or say that he was wrong or remember additional details that contradict what he said? Well, because were we to allow such recanting with having actually done proper due diligence prior to it, we would then be saying that no matter was ever settled. Because if a person can just come back the next day, the next month, the next year, a decade later, and say, oh, you know what? I just remembered his father didn't swear to give him that piece of land. He swore to give it to the other brother. Oh, sorry about that. We better reopen the case and everything has to be undone. There would be no end to a matter. It would constantly be subject to the whim of those who had given testimony of whether the testimony would remain reliable day after day. And so once a case has been decided, as long as proper due diligence was done during the case, once it has been decided, additional testimony from those witnesses are not allowed. Now, additional new witnesses could be found, and sometimes that will cause an appeal and a reversal of earlier decisions. But we don't allow witnesses to hold the matter hostage in perpetuity under the threat that they may change their testimony at some later time. Not to mention the fact that that would, of course, create a great incentive for corruption. Keep me, satisfied, or else I will open my mouth and say the opposite of what I said, and then everything goes back to trial. It would be a nightmare. So while we are trying to pursue the truth, we have to also make sure that that pursuit does not render the workings of society completely impossible. Again, this may seem counterintuitive, but this is a necessary precaution that one's testimonies be dependable in the first place and be properly investigated in the first place, but not forever be subject to changing ideas. And certainly, we also know that memory continues to change as we recall things, which means the memory eventually might be fundamentally at variance with the actual events and my first testimony, simply because my own recollection has shifted over the years. All right, one more paragraph from Sefer HaChinuch. And that which they, may their memory be blessed, meaning our sages, also said, in the Talmud, that with testimony about a signature, a relative is trusted to testify about the writing of his relative that he recognizes, and he combines with another to validate the deed. So testimony can be given in written form. It has to be signed so that we know that it came from that person. And normally we don't allow relatives to testify about each other because of conflict of interest. However, we will allow a relative to at least testify that, yes, that is his actual signature. And that, with another's testimony to the same, will be enough to validate the document. And with this testimony, a man is trusted when he is an adult to testify and say, when I was small, I saw the writing of my father or my brother, and I recognize it now. That is the one that I saw. And that which they said, that 10 creatures are disqualified from testimony from Torah writ, and like I wrote above in the commandment of do not place your hand with an evildoer to be a witness, back in Mitzvah 75, and so too, one who is not involved in scripture, nor in Mishnah, nor in the way of the world, that is to say, productive work, is disqualified by the words of the rabbis. And there is an assumption about him that he is an evildoer. As it says in Exodus 23, do not place an evildoer to be witness. Now, all of this is to say that there are certain people who are prima facie not qualified to give evidence. The most important one here for the average person is somebody that is not involved in productive work. That is to say, if they are not able to support themselves, then they are much more likely to be susceptible to bribery or other forms of coercion. And so their testimony becomes more suspect than we are willing to listen to. But if he has involvement in the way of the world and is involved in some commandments, we accept his testimony even though he is an ignoramus. We don't only take testimony from Torah scholars. We don't only take testimony from those that are known to be punctilious about every commandment. Were we to do so, we would be subject to the no true Scotsman fallacy, where nobody would be able to meet the criteria except the person who was issuing the criteria. You would constantly move the goalposts and say, yes, he's involved in those commandments, but does he observe them to my measure of what it should be? And if he does not, then I will not accept him as a witness because I think he might testify against me. So we would end up with an ever diminishing pool of people able to give testimony. And as we talked about, a society requires, demands that there be people who can give testimony. And thus we cannot raise the evidentiary bar too high. So even if somebody is only sort of casually Jewish, but they are at least gainfully employed, their testimony is still valid, and as valid as somebody who is perhaps more pious in other ways. You will be found to say that any Torah scholar is assumed to be fit until he is disqualified, and any ignoramus is assumed to be disqualified until his status is established with us for good. And so too, the most debased men are disqualified, at least rabbinically, such as those that eat in the marketplace in front of everyone. Apparently that was considered such a just boorish thing to do that only one that was completely divorced from societal standards would ever dare to do so. Obviously, nowadays, where we have kosher restaurants, we'd like a few more in Orlando if anyone's interested. But when we have kosher restaurants where that are designed for people to eat publicly, that is not held to the same standard. But it's more of if somebody flagrantly violates the community norms constantly in a way that is considered offensive, then yes, their testimony is considered suspect until we have additional evidence that, in fact, despite that behavior, they would be reliable. And included in the debased are those that consume the charity of Gentiles publicly. This was considered a big taboo in the ancient world, remembering, of course, that Gentiles, especially in the time of the Talmud, usually involved the idolaters. This is not saying that a person in the modern world cannot accept government support, which is not officially Jewish, but instead comes from a secular source. This is talking about the reliance upon idolatrous support in the ancient world. Okay. Let's wrap up a little bit with going back to Rambam, because while most of us are probably thinking, okay, I get it. If I have to give testimony, I need to give testimony. If there's Evidence I can give, then there's evidence I must give. And if I am put on the stand, I must speak truthfully and honestly, regardless of the implications of what I'm saying. Hopefully, all of you have got that lesson. Hopefully, most of you already understood that before you sat down to study today. Perhaps you didn't quite realize the importance or the necessity of testifying voluntarily, but hopefully you all at least understood that while you were under oath, you had to be accurate. But there are other times where the words of our mouths and the utterance of God's name can become important in ways that we are often too casual about. And so we're going to turn to a Mishnah Torah to tell us a little bit about that. We must be very careful with children and train them to speak words of truth without resorting to an oath, so that they will not be habituated to swear at all times like Gentiles do. This matter is tantamount to an obligation for their parents and for those that teach young children. All right, so Rambam is making a very powerful statement here, and one that unfortunately is still very much in need. You'll often hear people say such things like, I swear to God, I swear to God, so help me, and other such oath-like formulas that what they are saying is true. That is entirely inappropriate. Now, it is not the same as actually using God's name, the Yud He Vav He name, but it is still inappropriate for us to act as though we are constantly appealing to the Almighty as somehow a supporter of the truth of our statements, because that debases the meaning of an oath. It debases the meaning of invoking God's name when we are trying to prove the accuracy of our words. Now, the alternative is not to be casual and uncaring with what we say. The alternative is to be true always, without an oath, that a person should speak honestly and should speak accurately, whether they are giving a testimony under oath or whether they are just talking in casual conversation. That if we can habituate ourselves to be honest at all times, and especially if we can do that while we are working with children, so that they too will learn to speak truth at all times, then we will recognize that we don't need oaths constantly to prove that somebody is being honest. Instead, we can rely upon the basic statements that someone else makes. If someone says they're going to be there on Tuesday with the supplies, we don't need to force them to swear before God they're going to be there on Tuesday with the supplies, because we know them to be honest and they know we're honest, and we know that there is an assumption of honesty among all of us. But that is a group project, and it is a hard one. The amount of lying and of malicious exaggeration that continues in our modern society is absolutely disgusting. And unfortunately, children learn this from their families. I'm not saying that people are habitual liars, but there is a great deal of incorrect statements done around children that children notice. One of the things that I think many people who do not work with children often don't understand is children aren't stupid. They may be ignorant of a great many things, but young children, even 3, 4, 5 years old, they can detect a lie very, very easily. And as long as they have the basic information with which to check what you're saying. So if you say, we're going to be, I'm going to be there at 5, or I'm going to have, I'll help you with your project at 5, and then you don't, as far as they know, you just lied. You just broke your promise. And they will not just come to doubt you, but they themselves will come to learn it's not important to follow through with a promise. It's not important to do what you've actually said. That what we say doesn't really matter until somebody says, oh, no. Now, this time it matters because you're making an oath. So we have to be very much on guard when working with children and with each other, but certainly with children most importantly, to make sure that we are behaving properly. This is not about disciplining children. This is about disciplining adults. So please bear that in mind. Now, whether we are with children or not, the next point is also very important. It is not only a false oath that is forbidden. That is to say, I swear to God, yada, 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 that such and such is true, when it's not. Obviously, that's forbidden, but not only that. Instead, it is forbidden to mention even one of the names designated for God, although one does not take an oath. That is to say, to invoke God's name, even in a non-oath-like form, is still inappropriate. For the verse, Deuteronomy 28:58, commands us, saying, to fear the glorious and awesome name, including in fearing is not to mention it in vain. That if we truly are in awe of God and thus God's name, we do not use it casually. A reminder again, this does not mean the English word God. There is no special sanctity in that. And although we should certainly treat it with some care, it is not the object of discussion here. It is instead the names that we use for God in our prayers or in our Torah reading or other Tanakh study. Those are the names we are talking about. God's names don't translate, if you will, even if some of God's titles can be translated and then used in foreign languages. Now, therefore, if because of a slip of the tongue one mentions God's name in vain, he should immediately hurry to praise, glorify, and venerate it so that it will not have been mentioned entirely in vain. What is implied? What does that mean? If he mentions God's name, he should say, blessed be he for all eternity. He is great and exceedingly praiseworthy, or the like, so that it will not have been mentioned entirely in vain. So let me give you a very common issue. Imagine you are about to eat something, and you have picked up an apple to go ahead and have a lovely bite. Or rather, you have picked up a carrot. Let's use that way. It's a more likely slip. And as you are about to eat the carrot, you say, Borei pari ha'etz. Now, what happened? Well, maybe you weren't quite concentrating enough. You weren't focused enough. You weren't thinking about the fact that carrots don't grow on trees, and that instead the proper blessing should have been Borei pari ha'adama, that they grow from the ground. But now you have uttered, because you did the Baruch Atah formula, you have uttered God's name and done it in vain, because you have not successfully said a blessing for that carrot. Well, what you can do is finish off by saying Baruch Shem Kavod, right? That you can say God is God's name is glorified for all time, and by doing so, you are then turning that mistaken prayer into a more general statement of praise of God. I wasn't talking about this carrot. I was talking in general, that God makes wonderful fruit that comes from trees. Not this fruit, obviously, because this doesn't come from trees, which I just realized, but all fruit that comes from trees. I just wanted to also mention that. Now, is there a bit of a fiction there? Well, yes, that's where the brackets come in this translation, even if they're not there in the original. That obviously I wasn't invoking God's name to praise God for bringing fruit to the trees while holding a carrot near my mouth. I must have been just making a mistake, but this is how I am training myself to be more careful with God's name and to recognize that having said it, there is at least something I can do to mitigate the carelessness that I just displayed. And that is to recognize that it could have been an appropriate statement to make if I were speaking generically about God's great creation involving fruit of the trees. And then, of course, in the actual case, after having made that statement, I would then go back and say the appropriate blessing for Borei Pari Ha'adama, and then enjoy my snack of the carrot. But this is one of the ways that we try to put ourselves on guard. Obviously, doing it right the first time is very, very important. But if we have made a mistake, and tongues will slip, especially when you have said these blessings for years and years of your life, it's still very easy to slip between Borei Pari Ha'adama, Borei Pari Ha'etz, and many other things of like. It is important to recognize that even when we are well-versed, when we make a mistake, we still need to remedy it to some manner. And that is one way that we try to reinforce to ourselves that the names of God are important, that invoking God in a situation is an important and sacred activity, and not one that should be done casually, not one that should be done commonly, except for where needed. whether it be a blessing, whether it be a prayer, or whether it be for study. So this puts us in a proper formulation for approaching God, so that should we need to take an oath about the honesty of what we are doing, should we be called upon to give testimony under oath in order to be honest with what we are saying, that we will weigh those moments even more powerfully. Despite having already built up a lifetime of honesty, at those moments we will be hyper-focused on what we are doing and what we are saying, because God's name will not have been a casual and thus degraded part of our conversations. So with that, we will finish up for today. I hope everybody is busy getting ready for the holiday of Pesach. We will have class next Wednesday, but we will not have class during Chol HaMoed Pesach. We will not have class during the middle of Pesach. So that is next week on the 9th, we have class, but on the 16th, we do not. I hope everybody has a wonderful Chag, but I'll see you next week, I hope, and I'll get to say that to you even more imminently to our celebration.